Another type of call is related to trauma and abuse and just being abducted by the diabolical, and that is night terrors. Okay, if people are experiencing night terrors, you're having their demons that are visiting you and are sort of victimizing you and threatening you and trying to dominate you. So you have to get to deal with that. That's a call. That's a warrior call. You have to gain some power, some spiritual power to cope with that. Okay, if demons are visiting you in your, and pinning you down in your bed and suffocating you and putting their hands over your mouth, and that's a type of call. Okay, that's the kind of initiated into the darkness of the spiritual world type of call. That's a spiritual warrior type of call. And in general, being tormented by malevolent forces. If you're being tormented by malevolent forces, that is a call to be a spiritual warrior or a type of shaman. On the other hand, less acute than that is the kind of if you're stuck in a place of like being dreamy, having daydreams, being a real dreamer, being really ungrounded, having a tendency to go into imaginative trances, being the kind of person who in high school doodled in your workbook and did like all sorts of fanciful imaginings like, instead of actually listening to the teacher. Somebody who, like me, when I was working as a waiter, I was such an incompetent waiter because at the same time I was a visionary screenwriter. And so I couldn't actually get the orders right and be a competent waiter because all the time I couldn't stop thinking about the screenplay that was writing itself through me. So that is a kind of call. If you're stuck in this kind of Peter Pan complex, where you're always in this enchanted connection to the archetypal realms, but you really have difficulty grounding in the material world, then I don't think that it's good to just kind of like take Ritalin and force yourself to ground. I think you're being lifted off the ground for a reason, because you have a calling to work in these other realms. So if you embrace the call to go into those realms in a more focused, deliberate way, then you'll be able to really come back in a really solid, grounded way. And this is what happened with me. The only way I could get the grounding I have now is and I still struggle, like I'm not like Mr. Executive Functionings either. It's been a while since I started taking Ritalin, but it's been about 10 years since I stopped taking Ritalin actually. But the only way I could get this grounding is to first of all surrender to the chaotic part of the process more, and then like sort of like bear down and get through that. And then I started to reformulate a healthy ego. But if you're stuck in the imaginary realm, then you're not quite in the spiritual world and you're not quite in the material world. You're stuck in the in-between world, and you can be stuck there for a long time. And in Jungian psychology, they give it a complex name. They call it the puer aeternus complex, or the eternal youth complex, or the Peter Pan complex. This is somebody who is enchanted with in Never Never Land, but they're not actually functioning shamans, and they're not actually functioning in the material world. They're stuck in the in-between world with these big ideas that never manifest. And they go from one big idea to another, from one inspiration to another, from one foolish, grandiose plan to another, and they never manifest. And their inspirations are usually inflated. So this is a type of call, and this type of person needs a bucket of water dumped on their head in a way. They need to go through some like really grounding initiatory rites. Maybe they need to be beaten or by the shamans or something like that, But now this is also related to another type of call, which I would call just being on the autistic spectrum. Okay, if you're on the autistic spectrum, your only kind of empowering approach is the shamanic approach, because as far as I understand it, the autistic spectrum is the improper integration of your higher bodies into your ego and into your physical reality. So your kind of higher bodies are existing above. They're not like actually in enough. They're kind of floating above you. So people on the autistic spectrum have all these incredible gifts. They have all these like genius. Some are like idiot savant geniuses with like very narrow focused super genius abilities, and some people are just highly creative and they would be amazing mythical storytellers, like world builders, or like visionaries, but they just can't integrate in the social realm. Okay, really that kind of individual kind of has no choice but to be a shamanic individual, because they're already not in this realm. And so best that they get like firm anchoring in their unique shamanic capacity. So to be on the autistic spectrum is a kind of call. Now, another kind of call is the artist's call, and that is intimately related to the puer aeternus, to the ungrounded daydreamer, the artist's call. And that call is the call to create a work of art that has the power to influence culture. If you feel that it is your mission in life to create a work of art that has a real transformative power, that is a shamanic calling. Because in order to do that, in order to create a real work of art, you have to go into these higher realms and consciously experience things in those higher realms and bring something back. And that is the only thing that will have the power to give your art healing power, to give your art spiritual wisdom. So the artist's call, and that is related, the artist's call is related to like a kind of alchemy, right? Because it's the great work. The artist is an alchemist and is creating a concrete manifestation of the great work in the form of an artifact, in the form of a series of paintings, in the form of a movie, screenplay, story, novel, play, musical, a symphony, an album, a music album. These are all alchemical works. These are manifestations of the great work. So another type of call is the healer's call. This is like the wounded healer's call. This is the soul loss call, or this is also related to an accident or injury. Okay, if you get sick, and especially if there's no clear reason why you got sick, that is a call to be a healer. Okay, so first you heal yourself, and then you learn the mysteries of healing. So getting sick is a healer's call. There's a call I call the alchemical romance call. That is meeting and falling in love with your mystical soulmate, and that often is accompanied by a kundalini awakening, and that is often accompanied by mystical experiences or experiences of sexual ecstasy. Or mania, like romantic mania. When you meet your alchemical partner, it's a very manic time, very magical time. All these synchronicities, all of these, flowering of inspiration and your shamanic calling. There's a kind of shared vision of a shamanic power couple. So be careful not to fall into the trap of like thinking of yourself as a shamanic power couple, because that's inflation too. That's inflation of the couple. You're not a king and a queen. You're being guided by the archetypes of king and queen, but you're not a king and a queen. But that's what you're working towards. So the alchemical romance, when you have this kind of magically charged encounter with a soulmate, that should be seen as the onset of the alchemical opus. And the particular kind of shamanism I would recommend for that is the kind that I specialize in, which is hermetic shamanism, or alchemical shamanism, or alchemy proper, is the appropriate lineage of shamanism for those who are hearing the call through a romance. There's a bridge call. And so all of these calls are interrelated to each other. There's a bridge call. And the bridge call is related to the ancestral call in particular. But it's a call to, or the cultural soul loss call, or the voluntary seeking call. But the bridge call is the call to mediate between two seemingly irreconcilable worlds. So maybe you're like a corporate headhunter who has a health crisis and discovers spirituality. Then that could be a kind of bridge call to bring spirituality into the corporate world somehow, or to create a new entity that bridges the two. Or maybe you were a filmmaker who had a spiritual crisis, and then now your call is to bridge shamanism and filmmaking. Or maybe you are a psychiatrist who had a spiritual crisis, and then now your call is to bridge the materialistic realm of psychiatry with the spiritual realm of shamanic healing. We're seeing a lot of those, thank God, psychotherapists, spiritual psychiatrists, spiritual psychologists. These are bridgers. Maybe you're a cultural bridge. Maybe you grew up with an African-American father and a Chinese mother in Guam. No, forget Guam. But maybe just like in the United States. Okay, and so you've got to bridge somehow like vastly diverse cultures, like African-American culture, and maybe there's a shamanic impulse in the African-American culture, and a shamanic impulse in the Chinese culture, and a shamanic impulse in the modern United States culture. Let's say you're in the Deep South. Maybe there's a bridging that needs to happen in the Deep South between African-American, Chinese, and Deep South American culture. That doesn't exist. Those are seemingly irreconcilable, and so you have to unify them in your own soul. And so that's a bridge call. Related to the bridge call is the hero's call. And the hero's call is intimately related to voluntary call. Okay? The hero's call is in a lot of ways a voluntary call, calling all heroes. It's the warrior's call. We need more shamans. We need people to be initiated into higher realities, which are determine our physical reality. And so it's like we need like a whole army of people to go into this initiatory process with courage and faith and good guidance and bring something back that is of a boon to the whole culture. So this is related to the facet of the culture hero and the spiritual warrior. And this is a type of call. It's a quixotic call because it's usually grandiose and inflated. Like it's like, I want to be a Jedi Knight. I want to fight the evil empire. I want to fight the good fight against the bad guys. And it starts off kind of naive. And that's why the tarot begins with the Fool, right? Like it starts off naive, but then, be careful what you wish for, because there really is an important battle between forces of good and evil, forces of light and darkness going on right now, forces of truth and deception. And we need heroes, we need warriors, but usually begins naively, but with enough courage, with a real warrior soul. Naive as it may be, still a courageous soul. So that's a type of call, and it's usually voluntary. However, it's involuntary when you are like attacked by darkness. Then you have to kind of retaliate. In that case, the warrior's call would be kind of involuntary. And so the final call that I can come up with is a uniquely modern call. It's the I've always known, but I shut it out, but I'm not going to do that anymore call. It's the you've always felt the call deep, deep, deep down. But now, for whatever reason, it's finally the time where you embrace it. Okay, this is where you move from the refusal of the call to the acceptance of the call. And that in and of itself is like a call. It's a real transition stage. It's like the second call. The first call you've always known, but you shut it out. And then for whatever reason, you get a kind of second call. And that second call does the trick. That second call snaps you out of it. And that's often in conjunction with an injury or a soul loss or some sort of being tormented by darkness or some sort of consequence of not heeding the original call. So the stakes keep getting raised. If we have the call and we don't answer it, we kind of tend to get sick or tend to fall into what seems like tragedy, but it's not tragedy because we chose it for ourselves, because we're not following our authentic path. So I've always known, but I shut it out, and now I accept it. That's a call in and of itself. So these are some of the modern calls. So now we're going to move on to triggers. Triggers are so similar to calls, but they deserve their own section because for our psychiatric approach, we want to know specifically what has triggered, what has created the eruption of the crisis. So these are general categories of calls, and now we're going to get into specific triggers.
So which of these had you nodding your head? Yeah, that happened to me, totally. And that happened to me too. And that also happened to me. Oh my God, like all of these things practically happened to me. How many of these do you relate to? Please share in the comments below. And also, I invite you, if you really related to this and you're continuing to relate to this, I invite you to check out the online community that I've created that is made up entirely of people that shake their head to these symptoms and signs and triggers and dangers and that really relate to this material. Imagine an online community entirely comprised of souls who are undergoing a modern shamanic crisis, a modern shamanic awakening, a community of modern shamanic candidates. If you're curious to learn more, check out the information page. The link is in the comments below. And you might have noticed I look a little different here than in the videos. That's because these videos were shot back in 2017. It's now 2023. 6 years on, and I've been through a whole lot since then. So enjoy the rest of this series about the signs and symptoms of the modern shamanic call and the modern shamanic awakening.